Okay, thank you for coming. The purpose of this free consultation is for me to kind of explain to you what neurofeedback is, make sure you really understand it, what it's not, what it does, what it doesn't do, and make sure that you really understand the whole treatment process so that you have all the information you need to make a good decision about whether this is the right thing for you or not. Okay, so I'm just going to go through my little spiel and then you can ask questions at the end and
Sounds
make
good.
sure that you understand everything. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to tell you about kind of the basics of neurofeedback. First of all, we have learned that your brain waves are made of electricity and that they travel at different speeds. Okay, neurofeedback works because your brain waves are moving. Okay, they move up and down, they're constantly shifting. Because of that, if you have certain dysregulated patterns, then we're able to reward it when it shifts into a better place. And through that reward process, we're able to help your brain shift and regulate itself better. First of all, we have learned that your brain waves are sort of like a fingerprint. I mean, they're constantly moving, they're constantly up and down all the time. But when you sit calmly in a chair like this, your brain waves kind of go to a set pattern. And it's sort of like a fingerprint. I did my brain map or QEEG in 2005, way back after we first got the databases. I did it in 2010, I did it in 2015. And it looked exactly the same. So the brain waves are very stable over time. Because of that, if you happen to be born with high beta, for example, and you are a little bit anxious, it's really hard to just turn that off. You know, it's a very stable kind of feature of your EEG, and you always probably tend to be someone who's a little bit anxious. Okay, so I want to describe next how the brain waves, the different types of brain waves that there are. And really, the brain waves are defined by how fast they are. We measure the speed of a brain wave in hertz, okay? So however many, if this is a second in time, however many peak to peaks there are, it goes up and down to the zero line, however many peaks there are per second defines the type of wave that it is. So delta waves, which are our slowest waves, go from 0 to 4, what we call cycles per second, or hertz. Theta waves go from 4 to 8 cycles a second. Alpha waves go from 8 to 12 cycles a second. Okay, these are all considered slow waves. Delta is very, very slow. We really only see it in deep sleep, stage 3 and 4 sleep. We see it in infants who don't have a cortex. We see it sometimes in very deep information processing, but we really shouldn't see a lot of delta in an awake EEG. Okay. Theta, which is a little bit faster, is still a very slow wave. Okay, it is generated from your limbic system, and it's kind of like a hypnotic state. Thomas Edison used to actually put metal balls on his hands and metal plates on the ground, and whenever they would fall out, he would start working on his inventions. Because theta is it's a slow wave where everything that you know automatically kind of comes together, and it's kind of a creative state. It's also the state that you're in when you feel drowsy, and so there's a lot of good and bad aspects of it. Alpha is a little bit faster, and if you think of like a car metaphor, delta would be like first gear, theta second gear, and alpha like neutral. Alpha is when you're alert, but you're in focused, but you're not engaged. So it's kind of like, again, being in neutral in a car, and it's still considered slow. Then we get into the faster waves, which is beta. We have low beta, which is about 12 to 15 cycles a second, and that's associated with being physically calm and yet alert. And then we have the faster betas, which are associated with higher energy activities, taking a test, running a race. When we get into the higher frequencies, which we call high beta, from 20 to 30 cycles a second, then we're looking at if it's there when you're sitting calmly in a chair, then that's usually not a good thing. Usually that's indicative of anxiety. So those are the kind of types of waves that you have, and they're all good, and they're all there at different times. What we look at when we do an assessment to try to find out is the height of the brain wave is what we're looking at, and that's the amplitude or the power. So what we've learned is that there's a normal height of your brain waves. So delta, theta, and alpha waves should be about 10 to 15 microvolts high when you're sitting calmly in a chair. Okay, beta amplitude should be about 5 to 8 microvolts when you're sitting calmly in a chair. Okay, if your beta is like at 20 when you're sitting calmly in a chair, then you may not be sitting so calmly. You know, like me, I have high beta here at CZ, and that's my motor strip, and so, you know, if I don't watch it, my leg starts to, you know, move like that. So we're able to look at that, to do an EEG of your brain waves and to get an idea of where your brain waves might be too high or too low compared to a norm of someone your age. Okay, so the first step after the consultation, if you decide you want to move forward, is that we have collected now thousands of EEGs from people with no health problems, no diagnoses, and we're able to do a recording of your brain waves. We usually do 5 minutes with your eyes closed, 5 minutes with your eyes open, and then we're able to take that file and we're able to upload it into a software, this database of all these EEGs, and we're able to compare the height of your brain waves to a norm of someone your age. We look at amplitude, we also look at coherence and phase and other types of things, which I won't really get into in this session, but we're able to see a lot of things going on in your brain. But two of the primary things we look at is, the amplitude of the fast waves and the slow waves. And just to give you a very simplistic idea of what it does, if you have theta, let's say, or alpha that's too high in a certain area of your brain, it can cause, those slow waves can cause that area of your brain to be a little bit too slow or not function optimally. So, for example, if you have alpha or theta in your left temporal area, this is your working memory, this is your short-term memory areas, then it can impact your short-term memory. It can slow that down a little bit, the optimum function of that. If you have brain waves that are too high, the fast waves that are too high, then it can cause that area of your brain to be too fast. For example, if you, in your parietal area, which is your sensory integration area, if the beta was really high, then that could cause that area to be overactive. Okay, so one of the most important things that we look at is where your brain waves are too high or too low, and we call that amplitude. And I want to talk about that because that's the example I'm going to use to kind of explain to you what neurofeedback is. Okay, so neurofeedback was discovered by Barry Sturman. He was a brain scientist. He's actually still, I think, works at UCLA. And he was studying cats back in the 60s. He was studying their brainwaves. This was back before we really knew much about brainwaves at all. And he noticed that when the cats were in their very still, alert, focused state, like they were getting ready to pounce on a squirrel, that their 12 to 15 hertz rhythm on the motor strip here got really high. And so he actually named that brainwave the sensory motor rhythm. And he thought about, I wonder if I gave these cats a reward, could they increase the height of that brainwave? So he actually put electrodes in their brains and put the cats in this little clear box, and he inserted the electrodes there, and he set a threshold. And every time the brainwave went over that threshold, milk and chicken broth would actually come out of a machine. Okay, so if you think about Skinner and his rats when they would pull the bar and get a little pellet, that was operant conditioning, and that's what neurofeedback is. It's a type of operant conditioning. So the cats, every time the brainwave went over a certain threshold, milk and chicken broth would come out of a machine. Okay, do you remember why I told you that neurofeedback works?
Well, it's operant, kind of like operant conditioning, where they were getting a reward every time.
Well, it works because the brainwaves move.
Yeah,
I'm going to say that about 6 times.
Okay,
so I remember it. So let's just say these cats, every time the brainwave went over, let's say 3, they'd get chicken broth, chicken broth, chicken broth, chicken broth. Okay, it's working because the brainwaves are moving, right? So after a while, they were holding it over above 3 all the time, right? So then he moved the threshold up to 4, and then the brain's like, all of a sudden the chicken broth stops, right? Where's my chicken broth? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Well, every once in a while, because the brain waves move, it's going to go over 4, right? When it does, chicken broth. Oh, there's my reward. Chicken broth, chicken broth, chicken broth, chicken broth. Okay. And after that experiment, then he would raise it again. And the cats kept increasing the height of their brain waves. At the end of that experiment, they had all increased the height of their brain waves, and it had stayed that way. So he basically proved that you could change the height of a brain wave through reward or through operant conditioning.
Right.
Now, it was shortly after that, the government asked him to test hydrazine, which is a rocket fuel, because pilots were hallucinating and having seizures. And so he exposed all these cats to it. And all of the cats in the experiment, except the ones he had done this training with, had seizures and died. So he kind of accidentally discovered that training that he had done, that sensory motor rhythm training, increasing that brainwave or strengthening it, had actually made their brains more stable or resistant to seizures. Seizures or instabilities. So the very first neurofeedback was done with seizure patients. And they took a lot of people that had intractable seizures that were not responding to medications and did this training with them. Now, how did they do it with people, right? They weren't giving them milk and chicken broth, right? So what they do is we put an electrode on the scalp, and we're able to conduct the electricity of the brainwaves onto the scalp and see it on a computer screen. And then we create a threshold. And the feedback that we're giving is a visual and auditory feedback. So let's just say that back then they had this little amplifier that had a green light, right? And you could say, hey, every time you increase the height of that brainwave, you're going to see that light. And you're going to hear a ding, 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 ding. So neurofeedback works because the brain is a novelty-seeking organism. When it starts to get a reward for something, then it will do whatever it needs to do to keep getting that reward. So if it's hearing a sound, ding, 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 and that sound suddenly stops, it's going to do what it needs to do to keep getting that sound. So with the patients, they would set a reward at like 3 microvolts. Every time they go over that, you hear the ding, ding, and you see a green light. And then after a while, they would move the threshold up. And the brain would be like, where's my ding? Where'd my ding go? Where is it? And neurofeedback works. Why?
Because it's constantly moving.
Because the brain waves move. Every once in a while, it's going to go over 4, right? When it does, ding, oh, there's my reward, ding,
yeah,
ding. Then it'll start holding it over 4. Then you can set it at 5. And it does the same thing. So that's how neurofeedback works. Okay, so basically, when we do your QEEG and we get the results, then we see what do we need to make higher or lower in order to help your brain kind of get unstuck in this pattern and to learn to either shift a frequency up or down. And back when I started neurofeedback 16 years ago, we could train 2 sites on the head. We had these little amplifiers that we used. And then we were able, a few years later, to train 4 sites on the head. And then we were able to actually train with a cap, and now we could train 19 channels at a time if we wanted to. So we're able to do a lot more than we used to do. We're able to see where your brain's dysregulated, and then we set thresholds in our software. Let's just say, for example, that your theta was too high, if you have ADD, and your beta was too low. So we could set a threshold that you get when you get a reward every time your theta comes down, and a threshold that you get a reward every time your beta goes up. Whenever that happens at the same time, you get a visual and auditory reward. Ding, ding, ding. And now we also have movies that you can watch, and that screen will get brighter, so you're getting a visual reward. So we give you a visual and an auditory reward every time your brain comes within the thresholds that we set. And your brain will seek that all on its own. The beautiful thing about neurofeedback is you don't have to try. Okay, your brain will do what it needs to do to get that reward. If all of a sudden you get spaced out and your theta goes up, all of a sudden your screen will go dark and your brain won't hear any sounds. And your brain will be like, why is my screen brighter? Where's my sound? And then you get relaxed, you start focusing again, and then your reward starts coming in. While you're training, your technician is there watching your brain waves. And every time you get, let's just say your theta was 20 microvolts and we set a threshold at 15 and you're holding it under that regularly, well, then we're going to bring the threshold down even more. We'll set it down to 13 and make it a little harder. So we keep rewarding your brain for bringing what we want to come down lower and bringing what we want to increase higher. Getting back to trying. If you are trying, then you can actually sabotage what we're doing. Okay. I had a client come in and he was very anxious and he said, I did neurofeedback 20 years ago and it didn't work. So they sat me in front of the computer and they told me to look at the little screen and try to get the blue thing up and that was going to increase my alpha. And I said, well, that's why it didn't work, because trying and alpha don't go together. If you're in a trying state, then your brain's not going to produce a very relaxing alpha rhythm. So the things that we ask you to do are going to be consistent with what we want to happen. But if we're trying to get you to relax, we don't want you to try. Okay, because trying can put your brain in a beta state and hinder that process from happening. So really, you want to be relaxed and alert. So we have you kind of relaxed. You're hearing the sounds, but you don't have to figure out what's doing what and how do I make this happen. That's very important, especially for kids, because they don't want to come in and do work. And they usually like it. They get to come in, they get to relax. We give you a feedback that's engaging, that keeps your attention, and then they get to kind of watch the feedback. Their brain kind of goes through a workout, but they don't have to work too hard at it. It just kind of happens as long as you're engaged in the feedback and you're alert and we're paying attention and making sure everything's going in the right direction. So basically what's happening is that neurofeedback is learning. Okay, where your brain is going to school and it's learning to do a new skill, something that it couldn't do before. Because of that, it takes time. It's like going, I tell people it's like learning French. You get this information, you're practicing it, but it takes time to really master the learning. Or like riding a bicycle. When you get on a bicycle and you start riding it, it's going to give you feedback, right? If you start going forward and you're not balanced, you're going to fall over, right? That's feedback that you're not, and you're going to make adjustments and you're going to start riding it better. And pretty soon you're going to respond to that feedback and you're going to be able to start staying on it. And you're also, learning to work different things together, and you're learning a skill. It's also a metaphor we can use as like rehab. If your arm got in an accident and it was kind of twisted up and you went to rehab and you had to do exercises, to get it to do new things, then once it learns that skill and you're out playing tennis, it's a permanent shift. You don't come back in later and go, I need your help again. And it's the same thing with neurofeedback. So typically what happens after about 10 sessions is your brain starts to learn. You start to get some pretty good results. That's the beautiful thing about this is whether it's going to work pretty early, because you start to feel better. You start to, I was paying attention better, I'm sleeping better, I'm happier, whatever the results that we're trying to achieve, you start to feel those. And your brain starts to practice shifting into this new place. But after 10 sessions, it's really not permanent. So I tell people, if you take 10 sessions and quit, you just wasted your money. It's like taking 10 French lessons and then quitting. You haven't had enough time to really practice it, to internalize that learning. After about 20 sessions, I would say most people's symptoms come in about halfway. And then they usually have some permanent gains there. Okay. It's usually between session 20 and 40 that the brain really, I figured it out, I know how to do this. And you tend to get your best learning between those sessions. And usually at about 40 sessions, then people's symptoms will often come in as much as they're going to. Sometimes when you come in with several, like you're anxious and depressed and have attention problems, if there's a lot of stuff going on, then you may get to 40 sessions and some of it may have come in and some of it may still be hanging out, And so a lot of people then sign up for 10 more sessions at a time and just try to resolve some of those other things. But most people do about 40 sessions. Some people want to do a little bit longer. I've had a few people that finish up a little earlier, but it's not usually the norm, because again, it's not about what we're doing as much as your brain having done it enough to really master this skill that we're trying to teach it. So it's really important that you understand that this isn't magic. Okay, we're teaching your brain. And so I like to do this in the consultation so that you know what you're signing up for. You're signing up for, 40 sessions. And it's important that you do it all together. You don't want to do 10 sessions and quit. And I had one parent with a little boy and he would do 10 sessions and he would be so much better. And then they would be gone for a couple months and she'd come back and she'd go, we're off. And then she'd do that. And I keep telling her, you need to stay. So it will wear off. You need to come and do it all at one time. Now, if you have to go on vacation for a week or something, it's usually not a big deal, but you want to come when you can do all of your sessions together. Another thing people ask is, how often do I need to come? And most of the research is based on twice a week. You can get good results doing once a week, but twice is kind of like a minimum. It's kind of like taking one tutoring lesson a week versus two. You get a much better bang for your buck. Your brain's going to learn it much faster, because if you spread it out too much, your brain's spending a lot of time trying to remember what it learned the first time. Okay. Now, I think ideal is 3 times a week, depending on the issue, because then your brain's really, it's like taking 3 French lessons a week. You're getting it more frequently and you're starting to ingrain that learning faster. So 3 is great. I've had some people fly in from out of town and they do every day. So the brain can really learn it. It's like taking a crash course or going to a seminar like on the weekend, cramming it in versus, spreading it out a little bit. So they're all possibilities and they all work. Your brain can learn in different ways. But most people do 2 to 3 times a week. The times when it's really not ideal is if you have some really extreme trauma. A lot of times we're relaxing your brain and calming it, and things may come up that you need to process, and that may take some time. So I've had some clients that did better once a week just because they had so much stuff they had to process in between time in their therapy. But that's an exception usually more than a rule. Okay, another thing a lot of people ask is, does it work for everybody, or when doesn't it work? In my experience, it doesn't work there's usually a reason. If there's something metabolic or physical causing the problem, then neurofeedback's probably not going to fix it. So if you're not sleeping well because you have apnea and you need oxygen, you need to be on oxygen. This isn't going to fix that problem. Some kids come in and they have a lot of emotional issues and anxiety, and adults too, and turns out they have some type of infection or inflammation, undiagnosed Lyme or something like that. If that's causing the problem, then this can help calm the nervous system, but you need to get on the antibiotics or whatever it is to get rid of that inflammation, or this isn't going to help. Another thing is people not practicing good brain health. And that's another reason I like to talk to in the consultation. You know, what do you need to be doing at home to support what we're doing? We need to be sleeping well. Okay, you need to be eating right. If you're eating a bunch of sugar all the time, you know, that's going to hinder this ability to be effective. Exercise. There's no replacement for good exercise. So, you know, that is something that's really important for health. If you're not doing that, I mean, this can help, you know, get you motivated to go out and do exercise, but that's just something that everybody should be doing. Also, it's important that you go home and that you feel safe in your home environment. If you go home and you're living with someone who's abusive and violent, and, you know, we get you calmed down in a good place, and you go home and all that gets undone. So it's important. It's not that we can't start if you're in that kind of a situation and try to help strengthen you to make some decisions to be healthier. But if you keep going back to an environment like that after the sessions, then it's most likely not going to be that effective. I have to talk about electronics in our culture because it's a big deal, especially with kids. If they're on their phones and electronics, you know, 3 to 4 hours a day, then this probably isn't going to work. Okay, it does a lot of things. There's a lot of research, does a lot of things to your brain, and it's not healthy. So blue light from a phone when it hits your eye will stop the production of melatonin, which helps you go to sleep. So it's very important that kids have the electronics, and adults too, turned off if they want to get good sleep, which is important for all of this working. And then another thing, of course, that'll hinder the effects of this